What's up, guys? Today, I'm going to be reading a series of ideas I wrote down, discussing subjects I believe to be rather complicated, but also rather important to our overall understanding of society and reality as a whole. I discussed some of these ideas on a live stream not too long ago. However, I wrote them down so that I might present them without error and without overcomplication, if at all possible, in a way that is concise, clear, structured, coherent, and hopefully easy to comprehend. Now, let's start with the prologue. Pain versus pleasure. Progress versus deterioration. Ascension versus degradation. Potential versus passivity. The goal of an individual human is ascension, self-realization. But let's simplify that. Strength. The gaining of strength. No young man or young individual imagines their future self and desires to be a weaker version of themselves. The unanimous desire of humans when imagining their future iterations is that of a stronger, better, improved version of themselves now. No human desires to become worse. All humans desire to become better. The desire of advancement is a fundamental fact of nature and of the mind. Quote, "A man cannot stand still. The order of nature is eternal progress, and as man is the highest product of nature, he is a participator in this onward march." End quote. Simplified, this can be described as the overall accumulation of individual strength. Now, a question. Over time, which do you believe would be stronger? An individual that took a path of difficulty, hardship, and pain, or an individual that took a path of lackadaisical, pacified ease, pleasure, and comfort? Which would be the most direct and assured route to personal growth? One would imagine, or many are generally of the consensus, that the individual that took the harder path would emerge all the stronger for it, and would therefore find the personal growth and evolution sought after. This is the underlying theme of the worldview I'm presenting to you. Introduction. The centerpiece of this conversation will be about understanding that theology, and furthermore, the negative connotations surrounding homosexuality in the modern world and throughout history, which I believe to be a severely misunderstood concept within our society on all sides, whether you choose to partake in that particular discussion or not. However, there will be several ideas branching off from this that will help you better understand and interact with reality as a whole. Traditionalism, conservatism, religious frames have had a lot to do with the negative perception towards this particular phenomenon, so much so that today we still see a lot of even civil aggression towards homosexuality and similar human endeavors. My goal is to break down the bias and understand what is actually going on here, to look beyond the typical rudimentary us and them frame of reference and understand the fundamentals, based around the particular worldview as referenced in the prologue, a worldview I believe to be prime in interacting and engaging with reality, a worldview centered around self-actualization. I believe as humans, we're here for self-realization and self-actualization, ascension, evolution. We're not here to dilly-dally. We're not here to fuck around. We're here to ascend, to find a proper path in this maze or labyrinth that is the world we know. If this were not the case, we would not applaud and celebrate any time someone did excel. We would not pedestalize those that do accomplish. We would not have this innate capacity for hero worship, to admire others when we see greatness in another or their qualities, so that we can grow that greatness inside of us. That already right there is directionary of ascension, the capacity for admiration and emulation. We emulate what we admire, so we can improve, so we can become greater than we already are, so we can become better, stronger. It's built into us at every turn in human endeavor or accomplishment, the desire, the necessity, the need to improve, to climb, to ascend. This is where we are operating from, a worldview that places improvement and individual ascension at its core, because this is what we are, creatures of improvement, whether it be us, our surroundings, the things we create, such as our technology, always aiming at getting better and faster. In everything we do, how we act, our purpose is ascension, and this is how reality should be engaged in on all fronts, from a place of improvement. Consider, if we are not improving or getting better, we would be degrading or decaying. So it's simple, really. In any activity or engagement, it becomes, is this good for me, or is this bad for me? That is the most simplistic frame of reference by which to operate within the world, and it works at all levels of intelligence. It works at all resolutions and difficulties of life. At the end of the day, ultimately all complexities boil down to the simple individual relation of positive or negative. There's more nuances to that, sure. Nothing's ever black and white, but the principle still applies. For now, however, we're going to bring that to a pause and focus on our central theme, understanding homosexuality in our modern world. We've already discussed that there is a negative perception of homosexuality throughout history, and stated that it is still prevalent even in our modern progressive age. Now, to begin to understand why, we must first understand the underlying structure and layers of relationships in general. Let's start by breaking down the fundamental underpinnings of a straight relationship compared to a homosexual relationship. At the root of a straight relationship exists the types of sex, which are based around the purposes and intentions to the act, the two primary being sex for pleasure and sex for procreation. Now, I'm sure I don't need to explain, but in sex for pleasure, one would imagine an individual would look at their partner and decide, I want to feel good. Let's engage with one another for the pleasure it will bring both of us, as opposed to sex for procreation, where individuals decide, let's engage in this act to bring life into this world. I want a son. I want a daughter. This happens all the time, which is why civilization exists, which is why there are more than 7 billion humans on the planet. Now, in a straight relationship, the two are intertwined. You cannot have procreative sex without the pleasure aspect, and naturally, oftentimes, the procreative aspect of sex is not the intention, but it is the outcome. This differs from homosexual relationships and the underpinnings of its types of sex. Homosexual relationships are innately a complete separation from procreative sex. There is no instance where the intention or purpose involved is to bring life into the world. It is purely sex for the act of physical pleasure or intention of feeling good. Now, in a sense, in the modern day and age, this is actually heavily applicable to both straight and homosexual relationships, even throughout history, but especially in the modern day. Primarily due to advancements in contraceptives, sex has become a nearly exclusively pleasure-driven endeavor. Outside of contraceptives, there are many things at play in relation to this, such as economics, life expectancy, and societal or cultural changes. But regardless, sex is primarily pleasure-driven in today's world, with awareness but still less and less focus on the procreative aspects of it. Now, to highlight the present difference between hetero and homosexual relationships, while heavily pleasure-driven, many heterosexual relationships and much of heterosexual sex is procreative in nature and engaged in with that intention in mind, whereas homosexual relations are entirely pleasure-driven, with zero procreation present, purposeful or not, a complete separation from procreative sex, and predominantly and exclusively acts of pleasure. Now one may ask, why does this matter? Why is it noteworthy? Why is that specific difference so important? Well, what is pleasure? What are you engaged in when you're involved in the act of pleasure? The physical, physicality, and typically thereby, lust. Well, what is lust? Lust is well known by all, to bring man closer to his animal self, a lower state of consciousness. Oftentimes, it keeps a man from thinking clearly or making the same decisions he would make at a level head, sometimes even working against the good of his overall well-being, especially when not controlled. Acts of lust are not held in high regard in civilized society because acts of lust bring the mind of a man to that of a beast. And while man has the capacity for beasthood, it is not the desired goal. Man has the capacity for a lot, both negative and positive. Just because the capacity exists does not make it the proper path. When involved with lust, man is closer to his animal self and further away from his higher ideas, his higher worries or concerns. It focuses him on the immediate physical, when in this animalistic state of mind, man is far from his highest self. This relates to part of the reason why the act of sex is typically not paraded for all to see. Typically, it's done behind closed doors. This is why you hear people describe that after the fact, they often feel a sense of clarity. That is because they are no longer dwelling in those animal urges. This is what is underlying pleasure, or more so, in this instance, that the two are intertwined. And this is what lies under engaging in the act of sex, purely for pleasure. Now, this is not the end of the idea. There's more to it, nor does it negate the act of pleasure into purely a negative. It's just something worth paying attention to, and something noteworthy to our overall understanding of the topic at hand. Procreative sex is based on the intention of manifestation of life, whereas sex for pleasure is a descent into lust and physical or carnal cravings. Now lust, the desire for immediate physical pleasure, or such carnal cravings, can be highly attributed to lower states of consciousness, as mentioned, but let me provide an example of this line of thought. A good way to highlight what I mean by this is the following. Imagine a man in his 40s. By this age, he's likely not the same man he was in his 20s. He's likely no longer residing in that more animalistic state of mind. He's not chasing girls left and right. He's not quite as obsessed with the act of sex. He's not as heavily overcome with those animal-like urges, especially as frequently. A big part of this is libido and hormones. Part of it is also that throughout his years and experiences in life, he's accumulated wisdom, more and differing perspectives. His entire world frame has expanded, and he has grown as an individual and evoluted in his state of mind and perception of reality. Now, this obviously isn't always the case. It differs a certain range from person to person. Each individual has their own journey through life and their own pace of progress. Regardless, usually you are not the same person in your 40s that you were in your 20s, particularly with your sexual proclivity. You are not as active. You are not chasing. You do not have that same sense of depravity. And I use the word depravity for a specific reason. Depravity is very tied in with lust. When you're depraved, you're deprived of something. It signifies you're lacking, you're wanting, that you desire it. You don't have it. And already right there, that puts you in a state of incompleteness. You're missing something. When you exist in the state of incompleteness, you're already existing in a lower state of consciousness, as opposed to existing close to or in a state of wholeness, which is the higher state of consciousness. So here we are, having explained the key differences and underpinnings of sexual relationships, the types and purposes of sex, procreative and pleasure-based, and what constitutes lust, which is applicable to everything mentioned and present in both heterosexual and homosexual, procreative and pleasure-based. The key difference being that while lust is present in both heterosexual and homosexual relationships, and can be present in both procreative and pleasure-based sex, that homosexual relationships have no procreative ability, typically being exclusively acts of pleasure and a complete separation from procreation. This is not to say that heterosexual relationships do not also descend into these lower states of lust or those lower states of exclusive focus on pleasure. However, allow me to illustrate where these differences truly come to play. There's a story of a girl who was in a relationship. Her and her partner would go on double dates with other couples, heterosexual couples and homosexual couples alike. She had a lot of friends and knew a lot of both. She began to realize that there was a noticeable difference between the two, particularly in her conversational interactions between the two and the subject of the dialogue exchanged. What she noticed was that the conversation and dialogue of the homosexual couples tended to gravitate towards that of a sexual nature. It tended to be hyper-focused on sex, to the point where at times it was overbearing, especially for casual conversation. However, it explains how she was able to procure the following information. She discovered that there tends to be a much different hard limit in regards to the amount of time that can be engaged in the act of sex. With heterosexual relationships, one would imagine 1 to 2 hours towards the higher end of the average, with some extreme outliers spent engaging in the act of sex. Obviously, this differs person to person. Within a homosexual relationship, she discovered, as it was explained to her by a number of her homosexual friends, that due to the nature of the act, they could go for extended amounts of time, upwards of 3 to 4 hours, virtually uninterrupted, simply by taking turns, with outliers as well. Now obviously, this differs person to person and couple to couple. This discovery of hers is not applicable to every and all homosexual couple, nor heterosexual couple, but it might be applicable to many. There's actually plenty we don't know about homosexuality, because it has only recently been accepted into public domain and public consciousness, at least within our specific society. Regardless, the practicality of her discovery, based on her interactions with homosexual couples, makes enough sense in theory. There are hard limits for relationships with one man and one woman, breaks that must be taken, maximum amounts of uninterrupted time that can be spent. The same might not be able to be said of a relationship involving 2 men, or even a relationship involving 2 women. Similar wants and similar actions, both reversible, might lead to scenarios where non-procreative, purely lust-based or pleasure-based sex is engaged in large swaths of uninterrupted time. This might not sound all that interesting until you consider the implications of that across time. If in extreme cases for 7 days a week, several hours a night, Upwards of the average, a couple was engaged in lust or pleasure, i.e. operating from their lower states of animalistic consciousness or residing within it for large swaths of time, across weeks or months or even years. This would naturally seem likely to have some sort of effect on the mind at some level. This girl certainly seemed to think so when she noted the subject of the conversations, and her interactions with couples of this caliber seemed to revolve around a hyper-focused sexual nature. So now we're presented with the idea that there are different types of sex, with different purposes and effects therefore, and the type of sex that places individuals in a near to purely lust-based state of mind is also subject to be engaged in the larger amount of time, across time, than its counterpart. More or less that there's effectively a hard limit on the time able to be spent in heterosexual lust-based interactions, as opposed to the likelihood that such a limit is not quite as present in homosexual lust-based interactions. Without a hard limit, the risk is posed of a bottomless pit of lust. Across time, a never-ending existence in a lower animalistic consciousness. Now, existing in a lower state of mind, as opposed to a higher state of mind, most certainly cannot be described as ideal. However, it's important to remember that this lower state of consciousness can also be engaged in and maintained in heterosexual individuals. It is only that homosexual individuals run a higher risk of existing in it more so, or for more time, because of the lack of, or a different hard limit in their sexual encounters. Regardless, the existence of this cautionary lower state in both types of sex, and both sides of sexual relations, is a dead giveaway to the fact that homosexuality is not the issue. So then the question arises, what is the issue? Well, outside of the actual fundamental and theological reasoning behind opposition to homosexuality, what you're mostly left with is simply a form of bigotry. Though that type of bigotry does seem to have one major cause. The most common complaint I've heard of a homophobic nature is in regard to the often present flamboyant nature of many homosexual individuals. Still, heterosexuality and homosexuality are actually quite similar. One of the only big social differences, outside of the obvious, being how outwardly expressive they can be of their sexuality. Believe it or not, this can actually be explained as well, though it might not dissuade the negative attached emotions. The flamboyant nature is simply a form of peacocking. There is a common sentiment that is expressed among heterosexual individuals, I'm sure you've heard it before, along the lines of, quote, "I'm fine with gay people, I just don't enjoy the ones that make it their entire personality," end quote, expressing issue with those that seemingly make it the central focus of their lives, and as though they build everything off of that. Comparatively to heterosexual individuals, at first it doesn't seem the same, even though sexuality is still the primary driving force behind all creatures. It motivates most actions at a deep level. So when compared to homosexuality, is heterosexuality present the same? Do heterosexuals display it in the way they dress? Well, yes, clothes are chosen with peacocking in mind. In the way they talk, well, almost everything is done with peacocking in mind, even a desire to sound similar to peers, all to climb the social hierarchy, highly correlated with the desire to reproduce, or the motivating energy behind that. Everything is built off of that, in a similar way to homosexuality, but it is such a norm that it's not so apparent. The flamboyant nature is just a form of peacocking. They might act a certain way, alternative to the norm, to indicate to other homosexuals that they're there. Beyond that, because their sexuality has been and can be so ostracized for many, it's been a point of contention for them their whole lives, making it a more potent marker of their identity and focus of their reality. So that, on top of the already innate, powerful main driving force that is sexual energy, creates a worldview or pattern of being that centers their sexuality at the very core of all their interactions with reality and who they actually are. Ultimately, this actually isn't very different from heterosexual individuals, where sexuality is underlying nearly every act, deed, and overall perception. The only difference is that heterosexuality typically isn't a source of contention, which leads to it being a much less present focal point in their consciousness. As time goes on, and homosexuality is less ostracized, more common, and more of a normative, the degree and level of peacocking required will drastically decrease. So again, given that heterosexuality and homosexuality are actually not that different and share a good amount in common, then the question arises, what is the issue? This is where the cruxes and ideologies of homophobia typically fall short or fall apart for the traditionalists, principled, or conservative types, simply by prerogative of they don't know how to elaborate on or explain the actual issue at hand. I'm not going to denigrate or disavow the principles of traditionalists or conservatives, only neutrally highlight their ignorance to their inner workings of their own ideologies. Nor do I necessarily mean conservatives in a standard political sense, more so a cultural or societal level. Their ability to convey to those who might not align with their specific virtues the legitimacy or actuality of their own ideas is very evidently abysmal, as is clear in the past 10 or 20 years in cultural divide. For example, if someone were to ask them to explain why their ideas are centered the way they are, they often are not able to, saying, "Oh, that's bad. All right, well, why is it bad?" They don't have an answer. If they do have an answer, it typically only goes so far as, "My book said it was bad." They can't elaborate on the actual fundamental philosophies of their own principles. This does not apply to everybody, but it applies to more than most. One thing that is very problematic in explaining to those who do not abide by your principles is the idea that they're screwed, that all hope is lost, that there is no path to redemption. Of course, there's ideas of atoning, but often conversation can degrade into the likes of, "Oh, well, go rest in your eternal damnation, the fiery pits of hell." Not very bridge building, not actually a decent attempt at a liable solution. I would personally dismiss that type of damnation altogether. However, that aside, atonement is a real thing. It is possible to rectify on your mistakes. The idea of a sin, apart from the typical religious connotation, means a mistake, a misstep, to miss the mark. We are humans. We're going to make mistakes. It's part of the process. You cannot learn if you never make a mistake. If you're perfect, then what's there to change? What growth is there to have? And what's there to do? It is our mistakes that make the proper path so righteous and divine. The issue in this specific instance and situation is the state of lust itself. To rectify is actually quite simple, or perhaps it may sound more simple than it actually is. To combat existing across time in this lower animalistic state of being, one should, when engaged in the act of sex, do so from a position of love rather than lust. This applies to the heterosexual and homosexual. What this means is when you're engaged in the act, to the best of your ability, do so from a place of love of the other person, who they are, the essence, the love and emotions that exist between the two of you. The act of physicality and the procreative is a sacred endeavor that we do not understand, bringing life and emotion and consciousness into existence out of matter and action and previous consciousness combined. And it is the reason for our very existence. There are proper ways to do all things. It should be cherished and respected and not treated with reckless carelessness. So to do so from a point of love rather than and opposed to purely the physical, the pure physicality of the specific situation, the body. To me, that's no different than lusting over grass, cars, driving down the street, paint, drying on a wall. These things are almost mundane. There are millions of blades of grass in the world, millions of bodies, almost all nearly at a baseline identical. But the soul, however, no two are the same. This is difficult to explain, but pedestalizing these states of lust is applying so much meaning to the physical. And that's not to say that the physical doesn't have an innate meaning. It's just to say that it is a very local, base perception of reality. Rather than existing at your higher self, closer to the metaphysical, it brings you to a state of exclusive existence in the exact immediate physical. Naturally, it's much more difficult in practice than in theory, being physical and local creatures. However, it is possible, because more so than creatures of body, we are creatures of mind. It is possible, and this is where these traditionalists have it correct. This is why typically throughout history, lust and promiscuity were frowned upon, and people tended towards marriage or ceremonious practices when it came to high civilized society. This is not to say that degeneracy has not always run rampant, only that whether it was publicly celebrated or accepted is a different story. The existence of something in society and its acceptance are two very different things. It wasn't accepted for a reason. However, it seems that today we are so far separated from these reasons. So many people don't understand these reasons and just chalk it up as ceremony and tradition, bordering on superstition. There are these societies that existed before us for thousands of years, much longer than our society has been present, and they practiced the same tradition throughout these millennia for a reason, likely not a silly one. They existed close to necessity, and traditions that they didn't find necessary likely would not have stuck around for thousands of years. Societies that practice drastically different traditions in this regard don't seem to be around or have left a significant historical footprint. The ideas behind some of the traditionalist practices can be likened to if your father were to tell you something as a kid, and you don't actually understand it until you're older, until your consciousness has expanded, and you've attained a higher level of thinking. Similar to the elders of a tribe passing down laws, practices, traditions to the youth, and the elders pass away, and the youth may not understand until they're older, and then they pass them on to their youth, and so on. Traditions and ideas aren't just here for no reason, and it's important for us to not just arrogantly dismiss them or misunderstand them in our hubris, but instead learn to, at the very least, understand them before making whatever necessary changes you feel must be made in their regard. Because, of course, we cannot reside in the corpse of our ancestors for long. Change, to a degree, is necessary, as much as tradition, but it must be done intelligently and wisely. Like I said, the actual issue, the actual enemy of the homophobics, reality, and foundation of the philosophy is lust, casual sex, promiscuity. As a quick aside, Zarathustra said, and consequently Nietzsche, that, quote, man must have chaos inside them to birth the star, end quote. That the animalistic energies and lower forms must be used and cultivated by the higher into something greater. I do believe an appreciation of lust and the physical should be enjoyed to a degree, as it is another outlet and perhaps one of the most powerful outlets of the art of life. But it should not control you, because unlike some other appreciations, an appreciation of lust can become over-consuming, like a drug, due to the immense power and potent nature of the sexual energy. It should be ideally indulged in, lightly, in an intelligent, regulated, and perhaps non-animalistic manner. If you put a bowl of food in front of a dog, that dog might just eat and eat and eat until it passes out. Know when to stop. Know when too much is too much. Control yourself. As far as learning how to properly balance or cultivate that side of you that chooses to engage in certain pleasures, I would genuinely suggest a calendar. As funny as that might sound, a calendar is structure, and structure erases doubt, uncertainty, and concern. Doubt and other such insecurities are the antagonists to ascension and self-assuredness. If you know when you're going to do something and when you aren't going to do something, there is no doubt. A calendar provides structure and order and erases doubt from the equation, as long as it is a self-honest regiment. Quote, the best way to fight indolence is to have set times for doing things and keep to those times. Make a chart and stick to it. Live by rules, end quote. Set times for set activities. You do not have to be a robot, but you can be a man living by his own rules. Regardless, to the point. If they say and claim something is wrong and bad, they need to be able to explain why or what about it is wrong or bad. Here we have that. We live in a society where homosexuality is propagated and celebrated. That's fine. Homosexuality is a recurring theme in human history. Homosexuals, whether they choose to, or were born that way, or become so, that's irrelevant. It is what it is. They are what they are. They're just as human as heterosexuals. I know plenty of good, funny, intelligent, and talented homosexuals. So if they're human, if heterosexuals and homosexuals have more in common than that which they don't, the rift, divide, and demonization is not only foolish, it's sorely misplaced. As stated, the issue is, and perhaps demonization should be aimed at, promiscuity, casual sex, and its consequences and side effects. The religious, traditional, or conservative types often make the mistake of not understanding on a deeper level the underlying ideas of the most strict code and principles they follow. So when you have a society that is propagating and spreading homosexuality, sure, that's fair. But when you have a society that is propagating and spreading homosexuality alongside casual sex and promiscuity, and not only that, pedestalizing these endeavors, then you have a serious issue. That is the propagation of non-procreative and lust-based sex in coexistence and congruence with non-procreative and lust-based relationships as a whole. That's propagating lust stacked on top of lust with no strings attached and nothing but a lower state of mind. So now you've separated the two. It's virtually emotionless. There is no procreation or love. It is exclusively acts of pleasure. This might not seem like that big a deal until you realize this is being purported to the masses across time, undoubtedly having a long-term societal and cultural effect. Lust-based sex, alongside lust-based relationships across an entire society. The propagation of a tendency towards the lower animalistic state of mind across an entire society. The society that idolizes, pedestalizes, and virtually worships pleasure. These things are dangerous, and they are primarily only dangerous if not understood. It takes knowing a problem exists to avoid or solve a problem. Most will not continue in behaviors with frequency and nonchalantness if they know it's bad for them. The thing is, most people don't actually know or understand that heavy and frequently lust-based endeavors and states of mind are bad for them, at the very least, non-ideal. It seems there are many things people don't understand, but that's natural. Our understanding of things grows over time, and that's just it. When you introduce and propagate these types of ideologies, bordering on carelessness and recklessness, in regards to things that, for thousands of years, we held as sacred and protected, you quite literally run the risk of turning society upside down on itself, which has happened, and those societies fell, and new ones rose and took their place. But when a society gets a little too ahead of itself, it progresses a little too fast, with just not quite enough caution, you end up with a human organism, a society that loses itself, especially a young society that doesn't have that tradition to keep it safe. The United States of America fits the bill more than any other. We're the youngest, most advanced, and most progressive society, all in one, that there's ever been. So it makes sense that our path be riddled with missteps. But if we continue to carry on recklessly, blindly, with our eyes closed and without caution and conscious awareness to what we're doing, we'll fall apart, just like so many societies before us. Destroy ourselves. The only difference between us and them is failure on our part could take the whole world with us, the entire planet, resting on our shoulders, the society that worships a god of pleasure. Our society is a bit too young. Our progression seems anything but natural. It's as if you handed a toddler a supercomputer and a rocket launcher. It's a bit much. It might not lead to the best outcome. But alas, we do what we can. It's never too late to self-correct. And as a society, we're not getting any younger. So with any luck, that's good news. Perhaps if our society was a bit older and more sophisticated. Many of our societies in the modern age, where globalization has taken over, are so mixed together. A plethora of different cultures, more or less jumbled together. A singular cohesive cultural narrative holding us all together seems to be absent, instead replaced by never-ending progress. While on an individual level, we're all on our phones, we're all so busy, with little to no time spent reflecting on what actually got us here. And because of this, it's absolutely more important than ever to dive into these ideas, to make sure they're understood beyond the surface level. You can't just say, it's bad because my principles say it's bad. Do your principles explain why? If they don't, I'm sure they're there for a reason, and I'm sure it's not beyond your ability to understand why. The issue is not homosexuality. The issue is theologically what I've explained, that homosexuality has a high propensity to lead to pathways of lust, because there's no element of procreation, which is a problem that can also be found in heterosexual relationships, and that they both have the same answer, which is investing in relationships from a position of love rather than lust. Casual sex is the enemy. It's not homosexuality. It's casual sex. It's promiscuity. This all seems to align, the casual sex, the fall of an empire, with the subtle truth that even amidst this near infinite knowledge that we possess, we live in an age of ignorance and anti-intellectualism. In our youth, our society simply lacks thought. Even our language is premature, especially language revolving around or relating to subjects like sex. So many years prior, these things were considered taboo, or sex was kept under such strict lock and key tradition that dialogue, intensive dialogue around its complexities, was more or less avoided and never explored, to the point where today people cannot agree on the meaning of certain words or even the depth of certain human experiences. Take, for example, sex versus gender. I'm not sure where the viewer stands on this because it's become such a convoluted issue, so I'll simply state my perception of the fact. Some people say gender is fluid, and sex, I suppose, nothing but a shape-shifting fluff word. This is not the case. Sex and sexuality is fluid. Gender is a stagnant, biological, anatomical reality. Sexuality can be located on and move along a spectrum. Many at first might be opposed to this idea, but they would quickly find it explains and lines up perfectly with reality. Sexuality is not a stagnant, solid thing. It is like taste. It can be adjusted and influenced over time. This is why people develop fetishes or kinks. Say you reside on one end of the sexual spectrum. You're a straight male. You find yourself in a relationship with a female. She has a particular thing she does in your hours of intimacy that you didn't know you liked, or specific perfume she wears that now has affected your psychology in reference to your sexual preferences. This is why people grow to like strange, specific things, such as feet, or arms, or particular role plays. This can be better explained by people viewing sexual content online, who start with one sexual trigger, and across time descend further and further into different categories or fetishes, finding themselves in strange categories compared to where they started, having gained many new or different sexual triggers. People can develop sexual attractions to virtually whatever they like, to a degree curating their own preferences. However, that process can vary. It's a bit complicated, but this is entirely different than gender, which simply alludes to the biological and anatomical presets an individual is born with. As of today, with the limits of our current medical technology, there is no way to adjust or alter one's biological gender. Perhaps one day in the future, but not today. Your sexuality can be influenced by your active environment. Your gender cannot. Your gender is a fact. Anyone who uses sex in a flippant manner to describe the gender and anatomy is simply mistakenly using English poorly, or more so, that English in that regard is poorly developed or lacking. That's not entirely their fault. It's simply the mistake of a youthful society with much to figure out. This part particularly was actually very difficult to explain. I suppose because I'm so passionate about the potency of the idea that it makes it so that anytime I convey it, I'm underwhelmed because I don't feel I've explained it well enough. The fact that there was intense conflict around this subject in online discourse and whatnot for years because of a simple flaw in human vernacular, human English. The line of reasoning likely being because these subjects were taboo. Not so much gender, but in that case it was more or less self-evident. But sexuality was a very underdeveloped side of language because it was so taboo, also very complicated. So less time was spent understanding it and structuring it. The fact that one's sexuality can be influenced by one's actions and pathway and interactions with life or their environment is a perplexing idea. The fact that people immediately diverted into two groups or sides of the argument is equally perplexing. I'm sure there were many individuals that had their own ideas on the subject, but the fact that, for the most part, the mainstream conversation of the subject immediately divided into either of two divergent groups of thought and opinion on the matter was very strange to see. Controversial contention, making it difficult to talk about or find a non-polarizing middle ground whatsoever. Dialogue, non-polarizing dialogue, is extremely important to understanding reality and propping up a society with worldviews that remain strong and true across time in the face of that reality. We must talk about these things, but we must do so in a way that is honest, anti-divisive, and with the intentions of discovering our relationship with the truth. Our ideas are not fully fleshed out. This is why societies have tended towards traditionalism, and progressivism at its best is an attempt to flesh them out fully and then move on from there. Though, irregardless of that, with a bit of applied thought, these things are actually not at all that difficult to begin to understand. It simply takes honest and intelligent dialogue and an attempt to parse out and discover the truth. This age of anti-intellectualism is particularly evident in the younger generations. Cultural slang or phrases such as, "I'm not reading all that," or "this is a yap sesh," highlights this newfound arrogance wherein individuals pride themselves in their ignorance, taking pride in their unwillingness to use their brains or learn. Living in this technological society, where so much of what they've been required to learn is useless to them, or to the fact that there's such an abundance of knowledge and stimulation that it's overwhelming, and individuals have adopted to automatically divert to dismissal or disinterest as a subtle defense mechanism, as it is impossible in today's world to be receptive to all the knowledge presented to them, and where any answer can be found on their device in an instant. So why think at all? Why utilize their brain? And why shouldn't they ridicule anyone who does? Why should they use their brains, which is hard, when they can just swipe their thumb and the next post is a happy little rush of easy dopaminergic junk food garbage for the mind? Avoidance of personal intellectualism because they fear it might be too hard, or it's not as appealing as sitting back, relaxing, and letting someone else do the thinking for them. Not realizing that they're depriving the world of the particular genius that might reside within them, unique perspective of reality that only they can give, how their brain works with the unique collection of experiences they've gathered in their life. But it sits there, their untapped potential collecting dust, because they simply refuse to enter the depths and dungeons of their mind for no good reason. I personally believe that the age ranges of 16 to 17 and older are the last generation of intellectuals, true intellectuals, and I understand the implications of such a statement, yet I still believe it to be true. That's not to say that there aren't intelligent individuals, incredible minds younger, or that humanity will soon cease to produce intelligent individuals. I only mean to highlight that this world seems quite different to any world humans were born into previously. This complete access to technology, with every want and need available to us within moments, instant gratification, convenience, molding a world where a human could survive and live a long life without ever needing to think too hard. The brain and the muscles simultaneously becoming less and less of a necessity. It's reminiscent of the prophetic and timeless movie, Idiocracy, where a regular Joe travels into the future, only to find that technologies dumb down the entire population, and that he is considered a super genius merely by comparison. I believe that the concept of technology having a negative effect on the intellectual capabilities of the entire populace is a very likely possibility, and arguably already apparent, especially in the younger generations, but again, the older generations as well. But change is inevitable, and perhaps this newfound technological rapidity will birth a new type of intelligence. However, it's important that we aren't reactive and simply let go of the wheels or the reins. It's important that we attempt to carve our path through this unfolding reality and not simply sit back and let it happen to us. This anti-intellectualism affects and applies to everyone, including the principled, the traditionalists, the conservative types. If they would spend time, more time, diving into their own minds, spending time with their own thoughts, thinking for themselves, instead of passively investing in creeds on a surface level, perhaps they know it's right, but do they understand why it's right? Perhaps they know in their heart it's right, but do they know in their mind why it's right? Only through the understanding of these ideas, their ideas, can they be properly and truly coveted and spread to others. If you do not understand why your idea is right, how can you be sure it is, and how can others as well? There's no way of legitimately quantifying this or testing this, but I personally believe if you were to take the average intellect of the populace throughout different historical periods, perhaps medieval times or the Renaissance, and compared it to that of today's, I would argue that we haven't even really gotten that much more intelligent on an individual level, only that circumstances have somewhat changed. We may be more knowledgeable, we may have more access to information, but our ability to think is very limited and inhibited by our constant stimulation. Even the greatest minds of our time are likely affected by this, to the point that if you compare them with some of the greatest minds of the past, they would likely be outshined, simply because the individuals of the past spent more time alone with their thoughts. Intellectualism is actually greatly misunderstood in our world. An intellectual is simply someone who has the time to think. That's all it is. People often undersell and underestimate how intelligent they actually are. Their own intellectual shortcomings, the result of thinking less of themselves, setting their own limits, or simply refusing to try. You are likely very intelligent, far more intelligent than you realize or actively take into account. You're a human being. You are likely hyper-intelligent. To public knowledge, we've yet to encounter another species, more intelligent, as intelligent, or even close to as intelligent as us. All it takes is for you to think, to use your mind, to dwell into your own mind. The problem is, so few people, A, have the time, or B, are willing to. To add to this, genius has been described as the ability to solve a problem no one else can solve, or even further, to solve a problem no one else can even see, or to solve it in a way no one else could solve it. To be able to do something no one else has thought of in a way no one else can do it. At that point, genius becomes the application of your individual, unique perspective. You have unique perspectives that nobody else has. You have ways of looking at things that nobody else can imagine. Simply put, that in and of itself makes your unique ideas genius. If no one else can conceive of them, what else would they be? In our unique individuality lies our genius. In order to understand our individuality, we must dive into our minds. Many individuals, such as Carl Jung, believe that we have access to infinite intelligence. If the imagination is limitless and humans have infinite potential, then they're right. It's all about learning how to access it. Naturally, it's not going to happen itself. The intelligence is not simply going to express itself. It must be explored and expressed by you. Many are called crazy until they are successful or proven correct, and then honored as genius or brilliant minds. To be able to envision something no one else can, and then named a genius for shining a light on it for others, or making a reality of once only existed in one's own unique perspective or mind. Do you want to see things the way everyone else sees them, or have been told to see them? Or do you want to see things the way you see them? As long as you stick close to, or have a healthy relationship with, truth, you need not heavily worry about the perspectives of others over your own. You have a right to think different, should you choose to. What should be understood is that ultimately, genius is simply time spent concentrated within one's own mind, along a specific set of ideas, train of thought, or particularly unique worldview. That when one concentrates their thoughts across time, it allows them to layer their intelligence across an issue or a problem, as opposed to simply thinking about a subject once or twice for a few iterations. Increase the frequency of iterations of your consideration and conscious mind on that problem until a path is discovered or the idea complete. All acts, endeavors, achievements, and accomplishments in any degree of genius in history have been the result of time spent with focused, concentrated thought along a specific series of ideas, allowing the individuals to layer their intellect on top of itself over and over again across time until a desired end. In effect, laying a map of ideas or thoughts across complex issues. No genius has ever been the result of a single instant or immediate understanding of a complex concept without prior thought to the subject. It has always been focused and concentrated thought over time in relation to said subject, again, allowing them to layer their intellect over itself across time. Concentrated thought across time is the basis of all creative thought and achievement. Thoughts documented over time, utilizing the physical world around you as an expansion of your mind. Writing things down across days, weeks, or months of time extends your concentration beyond yourself. Mapping thoughts on physical reality, such as simply writing or drawing or other such forms of creation, is an extension of the mind onto the physical world. If you write all your thoughts down and surround yourself with them, you are now surrounded by a map of your thoughts, sitting inside your own brain, accessing the information. Write them down, come back to them. You've now layered your intelligence. Come back again, another layer. Sounds silly, but it's practically like tripling your intelligence or tripling your mind. If time is spent on a subject in the mind, if more roads are lit within the mind in relation to the subject, one has more access to the thoughts they have devoted their intelligence towards with frequency, and find traversing previously complex issues much more manageable. It allows you to craft ideas larger than you or that you can't fully understand. You draw a map across your reality, a compass even, a monument, a creation, or a project. Concentrated thought and well documented over time. Einstein, Oppenheimer, it didn't just come to them. They didn't just know it. They had to think about it. All of their accomplishments or mental achievement was the result of them spending extended periods of time concentrating their thoughts on their work. Intellect can be categorical as well. Many individuals can be extremely intelligent in certain areas and less intelligent in others. However, oftentimes, this is simply a lack of knowledge rather than intellect. Knowledge and intellect are two very different things. Knowledge is data and information. Intellect is one's ability to utilize said information. Intellect is measured by one's ability to utilize knowledge. Knowledge is data. Intellect is the ability to utilize that data. This is why often modern educational institutions are criticized for simply data cramming into students, expecting them to cram and memorize knowledge rather than offering them avenues for them to understand how to utilize said knowledge, or furthermore, their minds, outside of simple memorization and recital. IQ tests as well are markers of general knowledge rather than intelligence. IQ tests do not measure intelligence, rather, they measure one's general collection of modern knowledge. Assessing intellect is actually quite difficult due to the broad variety of different types of intellect, whether social, architectural, mathematic, literary, musical, strategic, philosophic, physical, etc. All genius is simply thought, and the act of spending time with one's thoughts and layering their intellect allows one to further their intellectual abilities. Through diving into one's individuality, one learns to think for themselves. Learning to think for oneself makes it so that one does not rely or look to others to do the thinking for them. Today, there's a lot of postmodern intellectualism. Large groups of people exist who have gathered and collected around certain ideas. They read a book and let that book decide their thoughts and perceptions of reality for them. During the 1900s, there were a lot of objectified scientific views on things, observing reality through a purely objectified, systematic lens, which is very useful. There's a lot of utility in interacting with reality that way, yet it's also innately anti-human. Contrary to postmodern objectification of reality, what we need more is idealists, people who are thinkers, idealists, and visionaries. They spend time thinking and combing over their thoughts, whether it be things they've read about or things they've perceived themselves. In the combing over of their thoughts, they're constantly aimed up towards solutions, answers, and better understandings. In that ultimate aim, they begin to aim at good, the best outcome possible, the ideal. They don't objectify their thoughts. There may be an objective element, but it's not pure objectification. We are human. To look at things from a non-human, purely objective form of reference, while sometimes useful, is innately anti-human and against our nature. We are subjective creatures. To objectify our reality stands contrary to and against the foundation of our experience. The notion is expressed in the phrase, quote, "They were so busy with whether or not they could, they never stopped to think about whether or not they should," end quote. That specific quote referencing how objective science often stands against our moral nature and ethics. However, in the defense of said objectification, reality itself often seems to stand against our moral nature and ethics. Regardless, many people, electing not to think, will simply read these books and allow these books to do the thinking for them, outsourcing their thinking and following the same trails and pathways of thought into these postmodern objectified views. Stagnation of the general thought pool begins, and originality and creative thought, individuality, unique perspective, idealism, completely non-present, because not only do the uninformed wish to not think, but even the informed wish to not think. And so society begins to fall apart, at all levels, with the lower levels of academia preferring ignorance, and the higher levels stagnating and congregating around these dead sea scrolls, these anti-human skeletons of thought, with no more originality anywhere to be found, just passive acceptance of what their books tell them, instead of a personal, deep dive into the theology and philosophy of these perspectives. They spent time studying the tools and not enough time studying how to be the type of person that can put those tools to use. In short, think for yourself, even with the ideas I'm presenting to you today. I've given them to you so that you may do with them what you will. Begin to chase your own individuality and unique genius and ideals, or, at the very least, have a newfound perspective and better understanding of the ideas discussed and the depth that goes along with them. Intellectual laziness has enslaved more individuals than any other vexation of humanity. Any intellectual shortcomings are usually and consistently a direct resultant of this. If you seek knowledge and wisdom, both can be found. It just takes time with one's mind. But many genuinely fear being alone with their thoughts. They find it too difficult, or sometimes too painful. There is a solution. In order to be comfortable spending time in your mind, do not dwell in negativity. Even negativity aimed outward will build the habit of negativity in your mind, and inevitably become negativity aimed inward. Any and all undesirable tendencies will multiply themselves if left unchecked, similar to a snowball rolling down a hill, growing larger and larger, and accumulating more mass and speed. This is why undesirable tendencies must be controlled and directed. As creatures of habit, the more we engage in an act, the stronger our relationship with those acts become, or the easier it becomes to engage with them again. This applies to both positive and negative. If you repeatedly take a path of negativity in any frame of reference, that pathway in your mind has now been strengthened. This is why people get stuck in ruts. They build their own prisons based on habits of perception or action. The stepping stones of reality are the perceptions you choose to take moment to moment. This is why people get caught in a negative feedback loop, whether they believe or tell themselves over and over again they can't do something, strengthening that perception and pathway in the mind, or whether they continually choose to think negatively about a certain person or situation. It becomes the norm. You automatically and habitually divert into a passive, negative state of perception. The same applies to the positive. This is why it's important to develop a habitual state of positive perception and thoughts, to create a positive feedback loop rather than a negative one. It's been my discovery that the states you reside in for extended periods of time deeply affect the trajectory of your life across time. If you're used to thinking positively, you will tend to continue to think positively and likely spiral upwards as a result. And if you allow yourself to think negatively, you will tend to continue to think negatively and likely spiral downward as a result. When you focus on the fact that you feel good, you will feel better. When you focus on the fact that you feel bad, you will feel worse. The mind creates feedback loops with conscious experience. Take control of that. Do not be at the whim of existence. Control your existence. If you're simply at the whim of the wind, are you even you, or are you just the wind? Only control makes you, you. When you find yourself in a state of perception that is undesirable, you must self-correct. And in that instance, you will even strengthen the actual switch of correcting your mind, and consequently strengthen your ability to enter the passive state of the desired perception you choose, and strengthen your ability to reside in it habitually or across time. In a similar fashion, if one would like to absolve themselves of their weak traits, instead of, and rather than focusing on their weaknesses, they should focus on who they'd like to be, the traits and strengths they'd like to possess, rather than focusing on the opposites. If you spend more time focusing on the strength and character you'd like to possess, the way you'd like to be, and spend less time thinking and combing over your weaknesses, those weaknesses fade from consciousness and reality, while your strengths, or the strength you'd like to possess, are fed energy and attention, and grow and become a reality as a result. You are what you think. Everything you say, everything you do, starts with the mind and the continuity of your thoughts. Words are powerful. The dialogue you choose to employ within your mind, or allow, or actively engage in, matters. The very word itself, fear, has an effect on the psychology of an individual. One can be weakened simply by thinking or speaking the word, fear. It has that effect on their subconscious mind. The same can be said of the word itself, strength, having a different effect on the psychology of an individual. The subconscious mind, because of the innate emotional connections one has with that word, correlations within the human experience to that word, drawing altogether a different effect and emotions from deep within the mind and the perception. You should spend time focusing on the positive, the beauty in the world, that which you'd like to be, the greatness you wish to hold within you, rather than focusing on the shortcomings of your past or present renditions, or any negatives that might surface your peripheral. If life, in reality, innately has extremes of negatives inevitable in its experience, one should spend time conceptualizing extremes of positives. Let the weakness and negatives of the past fade from existence or slide right off you, and the strength and the greatness of the future be brought into it. The only thing you can control is your state of mind. When you're in a bad mood, in despair, or depressed, that's the last thing you want to hear. But it's important to remember and remind yourself to hold in your mind, because it's true, and eventually it will help you. You know it doesn't help. Being in a negative state of mind doesn't help. That does next to nothing to actually solving whatever problem it is you face. A little side note, if you ever find yourself in a bit of a negative or derogatory state, try a bit of coffee. I'm not a big coffee or even soda guy. However, coffee is known to improve moods. High energy is correlated with a positive mood and positive emotions. Low energy is correlated with negative moods and negative emotions. It's just a simple little trick if you ever need a bit of a nudge. Naturally, never become dependent on it, but a little bit of coffee won't be the end of the world. Increase your energy. Coffee helps. Or action. If you give energy, you get energy. Move around, work out, something. Increase your energy, increase your mood. Stagnation, outside of genuine rest, hardly ever helps. But, in short, focus on who you want to be, rather than who you aren't. The good, rather than the bad. Easier said than done. It's a lot easier to obsess over the negatives that vex you than to appreciate the positives that let you be. But regardless, that which you feed energy in your mind will be strengthened, both positive or negative. The idea that you can be whosoever and whatsoever you want is true, as long as you are physically able and healthy. And even if you aren't, your mind is key, as long as you're mentally healthy. And again, even if you aren't. Let's say you're afflicted by an emotional imbalance. You are the single only person who can change this. You're the only person who has access to your mind. No one else can affect a change in there. Only you. With your mind, you can create your reality. Time is part of the equation and transmutation. The infinity of your mind is finite, limited by the amount of time you have here on this earth to truly explore and express it. You should not be overly flippant with your time. All endeavors should be engaged in consciously, with a form of improvement in mind, every task relating to your overall life journey. The story you tell yourself is key and primary. What you tell yourself about the actions you're engaged in or their place in your life has a big part on the positive or negative internalization relating to them. You can derive meaning and value and purpose from most endeavors. Some might consider it delusion at first. Delusion is part of actualization. When you first go to the gym, you're led by a delusion of grandeur, the idea that this activity will turn you into something far greater than perhaps your current iteration. It starts in the mind with imagination, illusion, delusion, actualization. Mind is all. Whatever form life may take is only an expression of the mind or mental parts of man. It is evident that mind is at the base of all manifestation, and that man is the highest expression of this truth. The presence of the animal in man is too potent to question, but it is equally plain that man has the choice of allying himself with the lower or higher principles within him. Insofar as he recognizes the basis of his existence as mental and drifts away from the physical animal, will he more fully realize within himself the truth that man's being is entirely mind, soul, and expression. To deny that man, to a degree, is animal, is to deny truth. In the most rugged conditions, it has been well documented that some men descend into such beast-like states that they are indiscernible from animal. However, humans remain the only creatures capable of rising above that basic nature in nearly all forms, able to achieve a higher, more noble existence, of which man is in control of his lower animal inhibitions. I would say that one of the greatest examples of this are the Buddhist monks, who can go extended periods of time without food, without water, without moving a muscle, without saying a word, and at the higher levels, without even thinking a thought, all with the simple doctrine of not only mind over matter, but control over the mind itself. These are masters of their lower forms, not slaves to them, where their highest, noblest form of consciousness has control over all other lower parts of their being. Whether you descend into animal or ascend into higher being is based on the conscious route you take. Every step in the upward path of man has been taken in the direction of mind, even physical strength. One cannot obtain physical strength without subjecting his mind to the struggle of the physical pain required to grow stronger. It can be and should be done. There is no paradigm by which individual evolution is not your own personal responsibility. Every individual traverses this planet alone. You may have a partner or a loved one that is close to you, that is there for you nearly always. But even in the company of thousands, one may be alone, and oftentimes we are. And across your journey of life, there will only be one constant: you. You will be there for you at all times. So then, it is of the utmost importance that you learn to be with yourself, that you cultivate a relationship with yourself, worthy of a lifetime of company, because that is what's expected of you. No matter how long your lifespan, you must spend it with you. Love and forgiveness for yourself, respect and admiration of yourself, focus for yourself. And these, believe it or not, turn out to be not very selfish acts, because it is only in the strengthening of ourselves that we can be of any use, utility, or service to the people around us, to protect and guide the weak or the lost. We take our strength and our love and pour it outwards, share it with the world around us. It all starts within. Become the greatest one around you. Lift everyone nearby and close to you, upward. They say, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. In my day-to-day experiences, I found very few individuals to be as intelligent as I am. It's a strange occurrence, and oftentimes people mistake it as though I'm special or that I have all the answers. Specialness is something that can be earned, but it is not the deciding factor here. Specialness sits atop the ziggurat, and perfection sits eternally above the ziggurat, just out of reach, always changing and forever unattainable. This is why you should be forgiving and understanding of your flaws and shortcomings in your strivings and ascension towards perfection. As for feeling as though my intelligence is superior to others, regardless of if that's true or not, it's important to be humble and remain aware of what reality is, rather than what your ego would like it to be. Be conscious of counterpoints to claims that might disproportionately throne your own ego. Do not underestimate those around you. Genius is actually much more subtle than you realize, and it's actually very difficult to passively express. You might be surrounded by genius, but there's typically no room for genius expression and casual conversation. We don't usually dive into extremely complicated intellectual ideas in small talk, which is what makes up most of your interactions with others. You are likely surrounded by dozens of highly intelligent individuals, but their genius might be just as hidden as yours. Genius expression and deep conversation are rare and usually only available under certain context. So do not make the mistake of assuming everyone around you is unintelligent. They might be, they might not. Finding out might be the task. Genius is also non-linear. There are nearly infinite paradigms by which individuals may prove to be proficient, excellent, or genius. Each individual should ruminate in their own particular worldview. Different world frames or frames of reference may provide an advantage in certain areas of thought. They may have a particular way of perception that lines things up or connects the dots in a way that provides a better outcome. Life is strange. There is no one way of being intelligent. Currently, people do not have stats floating above their head telling of their capabilities. And even if one day a technology such as Neuralink makes this a possibility, they will still likely be very inaccurate. So, to the best of your ability, try not to judge by covers. Humanity is riddled with genius. We must not conflate notoriety and genius, fame and genius. If genius were as rare as notoriety and fame would suggest or have us believe, humanity would have disappeared or fallen into pure chaos long ago. I also do not have all the answers. I'm simply good at finding the answers, or at least coming close to understanding what might be or what might not be the answer. Problems are meant to be solved. Everybody has problem-solving capabilities. It's just a matter of step-by-step, incremental simplification, taking complicated ideas and simplifying them piece by piece until you've solved the entire puzzle. What plays a big part is my sheer faith and belief in my own individual competency. If one believes that they are intelligent enough to solve a problem, they drastically improve their chances of solving said problem, and vice versa. If one doubts their own intellectual capabilities and believes themselves not intelligent enough to solve a problem, they burden themselves, because all they've done is added another problem on top of the already pre-existing problem. An important key in utilizing the mind is consistency in thought. To the best of your ability, do not be sporadic in your thoughts. This means, when you're engaged in a particular thought train, maintain it, continue it. Do not jump from different thought to different thought, aimlessly wandering the jungle of your mind, each thought forgotten the next moment, never to be remembered again. When thinking, especially any thoughts of note or worth, to the best of your ability, stick to it, finish it, complete the thought, extract everything of value from it. Allow the thought to have a full continuity, a full life, before moving on to the next one. You can't always do this, but when you can, try to. Try to make order out of the natural chaos that is your mind. An analogy I'd like you to consider is this. A body of water flowing in all directions has no real power or force to it, but a singular directed stream, all the water flowing in one direction, redirected into one channel, suddenly has much more force. Your entire being should be focused and centered around that which you desire. And I'm not only speaking on material or physical wants, but your overall aims and true desires of life should be the core of who you are, your entire being, your reality, and your thoughts. Only this way will you actualize, will you become what you want to become. This is the only way it will be attainable. This is the only way it will be real. Fully embrace that which you want to become in every way. Reject everything else. Writing things down is especially helpful. This is the best way to categorically document, mark, or measure progress, and to keep you centered in not only your life as a whole, but in your thoughts and your mind, and therefore your entire being as a person. Additionally, digesting small random bits and pieces of information at a time, such as scrolling through Twitter, is like junk food to the mind. It's entertaining, yes, but it leads to aimless drifting. What you need is continuity of the mind. There's an endless ocean of information out there. You will never be able to absorb it all. You could literally wander endlessly through it all. Or you could set your eyes on one or but a few aims, focus your attention there, and attract all ideas that benefit that aim, therefore benefiting you and those around you. This is key to the path of purpose in one's life. This does not mean you never stray. It just means that you lean towards, or to the best of your ability, maintain a general type of consistency in your attention, mind, and focus. As a limited being, you have a limited amount of time. Don't feed your time to non-worthwhile things. If there are things you believe to be worthwhile, that may not be directly correlative to your specific aim, by all means engage, but do not let that overbear and overweigh that which truly matters to your goals. In short, don't waste large amounts of your time on truly silly things. A true master finds a way to be as efficient and effective as possible, wasting as little time on trivial things as possible, only focusing on his goals and making use of every day to the best of his ability at nearly all times. As they say, the righteous path truly is a narrow one. If you fall off the righteous path, if you stray, in whatever way you might find you have, don't fret, don't freak out. Just find your way back. Avert yourself to the proper path once again. Self-correct as much as you need to, until it becomes who you are. If you fall off the righteous path, it doesn't matter that you fell off. All that matters is that you find your way back. Getting back on the path can sometimes be difficult, sometimes more difficult than it was before. Starting is always the hardest part. There's a ton of different ways to help yourself in this regard, though. Maintaining physicality, finding yourself in the gym, is a fantastic way of cleansing your mind and returning yourself to a type of baseline necessary for sturdiness and ascension. Listening to music, powerful music, the proper music, music that truly speaks to your soul or touches the right parts of your mind and being, excellent to help you return to your purposes. The right influences can help, certain people, certain voices, movies, or other such art. And finally, falling down. Sometimes one must fall before he is able to rise. Descending into a rut, ruminating in nothingness, is sometimes the necessary touch one needs to remind himself of where he wants to go. When you fall down, when you hit your low, all that is left for you is to go up, to rise. You hit rock bottom, or a type of rock bottom. The only place left is up. Sometimes it's necessary to fall down, to fuck around a bit, to get up, or to get back on the proper path. You might have to be where you don't want to be in order to understand and to know where you do want to be. Sometimes you fall down to get up. Doctrines of types of celibacy and strict restraint have existed for quite a while in human history. These things are not necessarily new ideas. There's been conceptions of the dangers of overindulgences and many of the pleasures of the world. Your relationship with these things depends on what you want to do with your life. A monk, for example, might be seeking a type of mental or spiritual enlightenment, making his path much more specific or different compared to one who might be after alternative but great goals. If you're not aiming for a type of enlightenment or humanity-altering path, you might not need to adhere to such heavy disciplines as complete separations from material pleasures or vices. But for any sense of ascension, these paths and ideas are very useful tools. Elevating your mind and perception is no easy task, but it helps with nearly every human endeavor you could set before it. Genuine strength can be found in the ability to go without. It takes strength to resist that which you desire. The higher your aims, typically, the heavier your burden, or more that you must be willing to sacrifice. The higher or more serious your aim, the more sensitive you should be towards your missteps from your ultimate end. You can develop to the point where you have 100% faith in your path, to the point where you have zero doubt in yourself. It's not impossible to never make the wrong move, to be right about nearly everything, to develop the Midas touch. You might fail at first, but with enough failure comes success. Success upon success upon success. A positive feedback loop. You need to trust me. Trust and have faith in yourself. Have determination. Knock and the door shall open. You must actually knock, not just look at the door and think about the door. You must go through the physical actions and steps required to see out and fulfill your goals. Big goals demand big sacrifices, but in the face of that, you can continuously let your better side take over, again and again and again. A never-ending ascension, a Tower of Babel within. Reach a point where you realize that nobody knows better than you. That does not mean you cannot be humble and heed useful, valuable, intelligent, and applicable advice, but understand that eventually, for your particular path, no one will know better than you. It does not have to be overnight, but you should aspire to reach a point of sheer utter evolution and competence in yourself that you realize when you look around that you've ascended to lonely heights where few men have been and perhaps few men might ever be. Complete confidence in your own decisions and perceptions in relation to not only your particular life path, but to the path of the world around you. That you know best, that your father does not know better than you, that your mother does not know better than you, that your grandparents, your elders, your boss, you have no masters. You are your own master. And when you are a master of yourself, Only then can you be a master of the world. Regardless, to the best of your ability, surround yourself with great men, other masters of the world. Great friends are hard to come by, few and far between. It's hard to find like-minded individuals, or those that also genuinely seek greatness and are ready and willing to follow through on what that means to pursue it. We live in a blessed age where we have access to others across the planet. Utilize the tools and resources available to you. Find individuals online that speak to the greatness within you. If you hear someone speaking and believe they are great or have wisdom to share, embrace them and their message and energy. Do not be afraid to follow. It is a common idea in our day that it is a bad thing to follow others. Everyone needs to be a leader and follow only themselves. Sure, you shouldn't blindly follow like a sheep, but leaders can follow too. In fact, in order to be a great leader, you oftentimes will first have to learn how to be a great follower. No one is born onto this earth with endless knowledge. You will often encounter others that have more experience than you in certain things or have given more thought to certain things. There's nothing wrong with being willing to follow or listen. That is what brotherhood is. Sometimes they lead and you follow. Sometimes you lead and they follow. There's nothing wrong with following your brothers. Sometimes they will have the answer. Sometimes you will have the answer. That is what humanity is, a team. We work together. Where you fall short, another excels. Where you may excel, another may fall short. We guide and help each other, like following your brothers into battle. I would say life is the greatest battle. Sometimes you will follow, sometimes you will lead. All that matters is that you win, that greatness is achieved. It takes greatness to recognize greatness. Do not be afraid to follow and trust others. Do not fear being labeled or called out for following or supporting others' greatness. Recognizing another's greatness is far greater in and of itself than tearing others down. Follow the greatness within and follow the greatness in others. With a policy such as that, every man following each other's greatness, humanity in its entirety might truly become greater. Quote, "Teacher and pupil must ever make up humanity. However high up the ladder of existence we mount, there are always those above the highest and noblest of us, as there are always those whose feet are as yet on the bottom rung of the ladder. Individuality is what evolution, or the principle of unfoldment, aims at, but it is the gaining of a strength to help, not to crush. Strength of body and strength of mind are the desiderata of weary men and women, because a strong character is the normal outcome of eternal progress. Strength is evoked, not to enable one to walk over those less strong than ourselves, but for the purpose of helping them. The phrase, the brotherhood of humanity, which is so much in the air today, and which finds more expression than any epoch of which we have any record, means that equality is impossible. Brother carries inherently in it one elder or younger than another member of a family, and who dare deny the duty of the elder to help the younger?" End quote. Humans have always been stronger together. The odds have always been unsurmountable alone, but together we could overcome anything. If thousands of individuals seek to elevate their states of mind, to evolve, evolute their minds, their state of being, the world might be a very different place. This is why it matters that you utilize your mind. We humans are too smart to not be able to solve these problems we face today. We're too intelligent for these conflicts we see around us, these petty squabbles that end in massacres or pain and destruction, brother killing brother. We can solve these problems. We choose not to. The nukes show that we can solve these problems, the ultimate finality of violence, yet we don't use them. For decades, as a species, we've tried to abide by our higher truth. Part of us understands that we're aiming up. Otherwise, we would have destroyed it all by now. War is a byproduct of a world that no longer exists, a world of scarcity where individuals felt they were forced to bite and claw to maintain their survival. Now what we face in the modern slave world is artificial scarcity. There's plenty more than enough to go around. We're practically technological gods, or near on our way to becoming so, masters of the material and physical, beyond genius by every right, yet we allow these silly problems a continued existence, many trapped in prisons of ignorance, all the many pitfalls, vices, and failures falling under this category, perhaps even malevolence itself. There might be a more sacrificial or malicious reason to this artificial scarcity that continues to vex this current height of humanity, but regardless, it would take but a few good men to change it. How many truly influential people are there? how many truly powerful people are there? But a few, and it would take just as few to fix our world. We are stronger together, and if enough people got their act together, took control of their paths, and realized they had just as much a part to play in the destiny of man as any other, then this world might be the place we imagined it was when we were children. The main ideas presented here today were that the enemy is lust, promiscuity, casual sex, and that these are present in both heterosexual and homosexual relationships. However, that homosexual relationships are of a high propensity to fall into these avenues due to their predisposed tendency to be based in pleasure and lust. Other ideas presented were that it is important for those of principles to understand their principles and spend time thinking about them, that principles without understanding breeds ignorance, especially if they are only understood on a surface level, that overall intellectualism is the ability to think, that only by individual thought aimed upward can society as a collective be saved. So I encourage you all to think. As stated previously, it only takes a few to combat the dangerous pitfalls of reckless ideology or ways of life. Whether these things or this recklessness is being purposefully pushed to the masses malevolently or not is actually technically beside the point, because when an idea grows large enough, it accumulates those that push it with pure innocence or ignorance of its negatives. There may be ideas that started with a small number of individuals with bad intentions, and as the idea spread, it grew to such a number that the majority of those that held such an idea were ignorant of its negatives and spread it with good intentions. Very rarely do people perpetuate ideas that they themselves perceive to be malevolent or ultimately malevolent. We often over-villainize those that harbor dangerous ideologies. That's not to say that villains do not exist, only that you should love and feel pity and empathy for your enemies, irregardless of the crime. It was by their own failures or difficulties in proper perception that led them to such a tragic end or worldview. It's very rare that the average human is engaging consciously in ideas that they perceive to be actively and intentionally anti-human. They aren't consciously harboring spite or other evils in their hearts and minds, knowing that they are doing so. It's as Christ states, quote, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do," end quote. They do not know that their evil is wrong. They may have surface-level ideas or subconscious feelings, but they do not understand vividly and consciously. They don't know that they shouldn't harbor these things. Life is confusing, and they've arrived at dead ends of thought, or simply made errors in their perceptions and actions, their states of mind, their relationship with the world, their train of thought, and the complications of morality and empathy. Everyone has made these mistakes at some point or another. It's simply that some make these errors a few too many times, until they reach dead ends, or are lost and spiraling down trapped doors of misperception, unable to find sturdy ground, without perhaps now shattering or falling to pieces at its touch. As childish as it might sound, they're evil by mistake. Children do not wish to be evil. They are born into this world, clueless, knowledgeless, and innocent, and the ocean that is thought carries them adrift through all sorts of seas, treacherous and not, until they either become skillful enough sailors to navigate across their thoughts towards righteousness, or they are drowned and washed away in lost contradictory confusion. Many mistakenly harbor negative or evil thoughts until it corrupts them, until they, by further and repeated mistakes in perception, become actively malicious in their minds and in their actions and journey. This is why people can be redeemed. This is why in our fiction we adore and have so many villains that somehow find their redemption after their tragic mistakes. Because the soul is innocent, and it can be lost if you're not careful, if you do not keepsake it and protect it to the best of your ability. So, whether ideas or practices that are propagating within your culture with negative outcomes are spreading with malevolent intentions or positive ones is often besides the point. What matters is developing a culture of individuals that thinks through ideas they hold clearly and fully on a deep level, so that ideas or practices that have dangerous or perhaps villainous effects cannot spread without resistance, with people just being silly and just agreeing and not thinking through the ideas they're presented with, simply because they sound compelling or a lot of other people around them agree with it, or it was told to them while they were young. So it's irrelevant whether a degrading idea is spreading from good source intentions or bad ones, because in either scenario, there's only one way the idea stops spreading: through a society that thinks at an individual level. The only problem and risk with a society that encourages free thought is over-decentralization, and individuals straying from truth. But what counters even this is the fact that we are social creatures, that we deal in a social and physical world, and with social and physical institutions in place, monuments towards a consensus of humanity, total decentralization will never occur, as it makes us weaker. What will likely be the outcome is the peak level of decentralization possible, while still remaining as strong as possible, or stronger than a fully centralized unit or society. But to advise you on individual thought, yes, you will get lost in thought. You will make mistakes in judgment. You will be wrong sometimes. But the best way to fight this, to combat this, is to stay close to the truth. If you don't lie to yourself, if you're honest with yourself, if you have good intentions, you can trust yourself, and you can trust yourself to deal with and in truth, even if they're truths you don't like. You can learn to discern your way through what must be true and what must be lies or untrue. And you will only be able to go off of, view, and be limited by your perception of the truth. But that's better than nothing, and still a helpful ally and a useful tool. If you're alive, you have some understanding of the truth. Without the truth, you die rather quickly. You can develop the Midas touch, but it starts within, first and foremost. Only then might it spread to those around you. You can affect change in your community, in your society, but to better the world, you must better yourself. Where else to start besides as local as possible? The closest things you can reach. Improve your existence. Do not drift aimlessly. Set an aim and follow. The improvement of self is the first step and the key. You cannot build on sand, on loose rocks. You need a solid foundation. You can change the world. You can solve any problem you set before yourself with energy, focus, and concentration. You can increase your intelligence. You can increase your strength. We can envision the ideal because we can make the ideal a reality. Have faith in yourself. Believe you can accomplish your goals. If you start by not believing, you've already shot yourself in the foot. Self-doubt is the highest form of self-sabotage. Believe you can accomplish your goal. That is the first step. Then figure out how. That is the second step. The third step is doing it. The fourth is teaching others how to do it as well. If 1 man out of 1 million proves it, then it is the truth, and others may do the same in due course. What man has done, man can do. Utilize your mind. Save yourself, and you save the world. I wish you luck in your journey. I believe in you. Utilize your mind. Thank you.